If you have any questions tonight, please place them in the chat. I am pleased to introduce Alice Touzignan, who was the chair of the affordable housing study. And this was approved 2 years ago at convention. And it was a 2-year labor of love. The reason that we have studies is so that we can produce positions, and that's how we do advocacy. And because we did not have an affordable housing study, it was important, or a position, it was important to do one so that we can advocate for affordable housing. So I will hand it over to Alice to get started.
Great, thanks, Deb, I appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for attending tonight's Affordable Housing Caucus. I understand that we have a gubernatorial debate going on, so we have a little bit of competition. Although this might be more interesting than the debate. I don't know, it's hard to say. I'd like to give special recognition and appreciation to the State Affordable Housing Study Committee. I don't know if there's anyone present on this call tonight, but they were really amazing. We had representatives from all but one of the local leagues on the study committee, and we began our meetings in mid-2019 and continued until our last official meeting in February of this year. This work couldn't have been done without such an engaged and hardworking committee. In addition to the 40+ page affordable housing study report that we wrote, we also made presentations on a summary of the report around the state to all the local leagues. In addition, I made the presentation to 2 non-leagues as well. Local leagues then discussed the study questions and came to consensus on each of the state housing solutions we proposed. While there were a few solutions where one league disagreed and did not come to consensus, overall, we interpreted the results as consensus on all solutions. I hope everyone had a chance to look at the report, or at least the executive summary at the beginning of the report, as well as the full position that we are recommending. In a minute, I'll be screen sharing a PowerPoint to review the committee's work and the resulting positions that are being recommended. This should take about 30 minutes, and then we should have plenty of time for questions and answers. I'm hoping that we can adjourn by 8, if at all possible. And I'm going to screen share now. Hopefully I can do this correctly. Okay, here we go. All right. So can you all see that? Okay, yes. Well, you're all on mute. So, and I'm gonna try to move this. I'm actually going to, as long as you guys don't hear that I have to look close in order to see, because I'm legally blind, I think we'll all be fine. All right, let's see. Let me minimize this, move this. Good. So,
Alice, may I interrupt a moment?
Yes.
Someone has their hand raised. Would you like to take that now, or would you like to hold all questions to the end?
If we could hold questions to the end, that would be great, unless they can't see the PowerPoint.
If you are having problems with anything or have questions about anything that besides the study as well, if you will put them into the chat privately, and I can help you with them perhaps. Sorry.
Great. So this is what we're going to review tonight in this next 30 minutes. We're going to talk about why this study, the affordable housing positions of the U.S. League as well as the state, our study focus area and the problem related to that focus area. And then finally, half of the time will be spent on the affordable housing position or the recommended solutions that we're proposing. And why the study, first of all, there's really 3 overarching reasons. And the first is that there's a great unmet need for affordable housing, especially for very low-income people. The second is that this is there are state solutions, actually very important state solutions in helping to meet this unmet need. And finally, we want to do some advocacy around affordable housing. So this is really, why we're doing it. So at any rate, I'm just going to backtrack just a little bit. The study got started by the Richmond Affordable Housing Committee that started in 2018. And we started out by reading Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted, that tells the stories about families who are being evicted and the landlords doing the evicting. It's a pretty compelling but very depressing book. But anyway, he won the Pulitzer Prize for the book as well as a MacArthur Award. And that enabled him to start the nation's first ever eviction lab, which contains millions of data sets on evictions across the United States. When the first set of research came out in the spring of 2018, the city of Richmond was thrust into the spotlight by a New York Times article that said Richmond had the second highest eviction rate in the nation for cities its size. So our league decided, we really wanted to focus on renter households who are very low income. And we then, asked for the study. And so the rest is history. And this is culminating at the end of the study will be this weekend. Here's a list of the Affordable Housing Study Committee. And as you can see, there were 13 out of the 14 leagues represented. And so the current positions, the US League has a fair housing position. They also talk about housing supply in the basic human needs position, and they have supported every major piece of federal housing laws, including most recently the National Housing Trust Fund. They acknowledge that the federal government has primary financing role, but that states have a supplemental role. And some states, we did a research, and some states have really good housing positions. And you can find those in a summary on the State League's website in the member portal. And there's a housing study where you can find all this information that I'm talking about. And as Deb said, there's really no formal state, Virginia, affordable housing position. However, in the behavioral health position that was approved in 2018, they do talk about solutions like the Housing Trust Fund and permanent supportive housing. And there's also many of the local leagues, like at least 9 of them, support affordable housing on their website. They have positions, and many of them have committees as well. So the focus of our study was renter households with incomes at or below 50% of area median income, which for a household of one is $31,000. The focus also includes people who are homeless because they obviously need rental housing. And we are going to talk about in the next few slides about why we had this particular focus area. So what is affordable housing? Housing is considered affordable if your rent and utilities consume no more than 30% of your monthly income. If your rent consumes more than 30%, you're considered housing cost burden. If your rent takes up more than 50% of your income, you're considered severely cost burden. In Virginia, 87% of extremely low income renter households, those whose income is $18,000 for a household of one, are severely cost burden. And 70% of are cost burden rather, and 70% of extremely low income renter households are severely cost burden. And here's the cost burden again by income, with the blue bar being cost burden and the red being severely cost burden. And as you can see, the lower the income, the higher the cost burden, which just makes sense. In Virginia, it varies around the state. So the average for extremely low income households is 70% of them are severely cost burden. And the highest severe cost burden for extremely low income households is in Northern Virginia. Theirs is 76%. So the National Low Income Housing Coalition, which is the premier nonprofit housing organization in the nation that does so much advocacy and education, puts out this gap report, and it documents the shortage of affordable housing. There are only 36 available and affordable housing units in Virginia for every 100 extremely low income renter, which equates to a deficit of 157,000 units. And of course, the largest gap is in Northern Virginia. Only 28 housing units are available for every 100 extremely low income renters. And here's just a depiction of that gap by region. So on the far right, you'll see Northern Virginia, the blue bar being the housing units available for extremely low income people, and the red being those needed. In the middle is Hampton Roads and Richmond's to the left. So this next chart is about fair market rents. Fair market rents are determined by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or because of they run the Housing Choice Voucher Program. That's the only federal housing subsidy program. It used to be called Section 8. And in order to figure out how much rent they're going to pay, that subsidy, they have to determine these fair market rents. It varies widely in Virginia. This chart shows one bedroom fair market rents with Northern Virginia at $1,500 for a one bedroom compared to, smaller areas, more rural areas where the rent is about $500. But this is fair market rents. The average rent actually is higher than that. You would be hard pressed to find a rent in the fair market range in your area. The National Low Income Housing Coalition also puts out this out of reach report. So what that does is it documents the gap between renters' wages and the renter and the cost of rent. So of Virginians, they're 1/3 of them, or about 1 million households, are renters. If you're working at minimum wage, which is $7.25, it hasn't been increased yet, you would need to work 109 hours a week or earn almost $43,000 to afford a one bedroom FMR in Virginia. All of these wage earners below cannot afford a one bedroom FMR. And if you'll notice, so many of them were, really at risk during COVID, and they were, disproportionately at risk during COVID. So we're talking about senior care providers, nursing assistants, personal care aides, teachers' assistants, security guards, and that retail clerks. And then we talked about affordable housing, homelessness, and that being within our focus area because people who are homeless need rental housing. Well, in Virginia, homelessness has actually decreased over the last 10 years by about 36%. And the reason for that is because the state of Virginia has put in a lot of money over the last 30 years for homelessness. And they are using the best practice solutions in order to reduce and end it. Those are things like short-term shelter, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing. What is permanent supportive housing? So it's a best practice model that combines affordable housing, usually with rental subsidies, and comprehensive wraparound support services for people with serious disabilities. It's especially successful for people who are chronically homeless. And there's really a 95% success rate for people in chronically homeless who are put into permanent supportive housing. 95% of them remain stably housed. We talked about the eviction crisis, and it is a crisis in Virginia. So you'll notice that Virginia's eviction rate is twice the national average. And Richmond's eviction rate is 5 times the national average. So you'll see on the left, the chart, that not only is Richmond the second highest, but there are 4 other cities in the top 10 that have the highest eviction rates in the nation. And then for mid-sized cities, we have the dubious distinction of having 3 of the top 5, with Petersburg number 2. You'll notice they're all clustered in the Hampton Roads and Central Virginia area. And these are areas with the highest poverty rates. There's really no Northern Virginia city or county that has a really high poverty rate. And I think the other explanation for Northern Virginia is that they have really robust housing eviction prevention programs and even some rental assistance programs, where these are predominantly non-existent in these larger cities that are on, or even the mid-sized cities on this chart. We're going to talk about more evictions in terms of solutions coming up. So what's the state's role? The state, as I said, when I started, has a big role in affordable housing. So they provide financial resources such as the Virginia Housing Trust Fund, and they enact policies and laws that can either help or hinder the supply of and access to affordable housing. So they, it's the Landlord Tenant Act, the statewide building code, and many other laws and policies. Now we're moving into the second part, which is really what our position is and what we're proposing. So the position in brief is the League of Women Voters supports state funding mechanisms and laws and policies that increase the supply of and access to safe, quality, affordable housing for all Virginians. So to create our position in full, we divided that position in brief into two: funding mechanisms and laws and policies. So now I'm going to briefly go over the funding mechanisms. The first is the Virginia Housing Trust Fund. So we're one of 47 states that have a housing trust fund. And what they are is they help with gap financing in order to create additional affordable housing and preserve affordable housing that we already have. Ours in Virginia started in, it was approved in 2013, but really started in 2014. And since then, thousands of units have been created, and at least half of them are for people who are very low income and below. And we started out with a $7 million appropriation in 2014, and that has changed over the years, but recently it has really increased. And in the 21 General Assembly, they appropriated $70 million for the Housing Trust Fund. And the reason they did is because they understood and saw how important affordable housing was during this pandemic, when so many people were in danger of losing their homes. And, everybody understood now how important affordable housing was. So there's 70 million this year, and in FY22, there'll be 55 million. At 60% of those funds can be spent on loans or low interest loans to create or preserve affordable housing, and 40% can be spent on grants to help reduce and end homelessness. That includes the best practice solutions I was talking about, as well as services in permanent supportive housing. So this permanent supportive housing, the next one is by the way, the Housing Trust Fund is administered by the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development. Permanent supportive housing on this chart refers to that being administered by the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. And what that is we started in 2016 to provide rental subsidies to people with serious mental illness who are either chronically homeless or being discharged from state hospitals or in unstable housing and frequent uses of hospitals. And so they have, they started out with about 17 million in fiscal year 21 that we're currently in. 20 million has been appropriated, and that will provide rental subsidies to 1,200 individuals with serious mental illness. So again, it's rental subsidies. The support services are provided by community services boards or private agencies in the community. The fiscal year 22 appropriation is going to be 34 million. So I'm not exactly sure how many more individuals will be helped, but many more, I think. The third is homeless grants and services. As I said, the state of Virginia has been providing grants to try to end and reduce homelessness since 1988, as a matter of fact. And it continues today. They are providing 12 million in state funds for, again, those best practice solutions. They give it to over 80 organizations around the state to work on the problem. The fourth resource is eviction prevention and diversion programs. And when we were thrust into the spotlight in 2018 because of our eviction crisis in the state, a group of people got together around the state to work on the problem. And one of the solutions we came up with was to have a state-funded eviction prevention diversion program. It's taken a while to happen, but monies were finally appropriated in this General Assembly, 3.3 million a year for this year and 3.3 million next year. It's a pilot program. Now, this is really being dwarfed by the emergency rental assistance that was provided during the CARES Act, like over 50 million in the state. And then in the American Rescue Plan, there's like 600 million available in the state for emergency rental assistance. So, there's plenty of rental assistance right now, but that will eventually go away, and the state ought to have its own prevention program. The fifth resource is a state low-income housing tax credit program. And what that does is it is a companion to the federal low-income housing tax credit program, which gives developers a tax credit, and in turn, they give equity in a project. And what that does is it allows developers to develop housing for people at 50, 60, 70, 80% of area median income. If we had a state-funded housing tax credit program, potentially we could serve people at even lower incomes. In the 2021 General Assembly, a state housing opportunity tax credit program was passed, and it provides 15 million for this program for 10 years. However, there are some technical issues with the law that was passed, and it's really not enough money. So we will be needing to watch that and potentially advocate for different amendments next year. The final resource is a state-funded housing choice voucher program. I talked about the federal one. That program is very underfunded and oversubscribed, and there are waiting lists around the state for people who are very low income. So a state-funded program would help fill the gap, and it would be very similar to what is being done at the Department of Behavioral Health, because that's actually a subsidy program going just to this special needs population of people with serious mental illness. So those are the resources. We're going to now move on to the laws, policies, and laws. The first is the source of income statute. That was passed in 2020. And what that says is that if you are a landlord and you own more than 4 rental units, you must rent a unit to a housing choice voucher holder, provided that they meet the same rental criteria as other prospective tenants, and that the housing authority approves all the paperwork within 15 days. Prior to 2020, the statute being in place, it was legal for landlords just to simply say, no, I'm not going to take housing choice vouchers. It's a racial equity issue because predominantly the voucher holders are African American, and it's a fair housing issue as well. The second one is mandatory inclusionary zoning. And what that does is it adds affordable dwelling units to regular housing projects. And if it's mandatory, there's a mandatory statute that only applies to 7 localities in the state because you need enabling legislation because of the Dillon rule. And those 7 localities are 5 in Northern Virginia and then Charlottesville and Albemarle. And what they can do is they can require developers to add affordable dwelling units, and they give them incentives to do that. The incentives are things like access to local housing funds, reduction in fees, increased density bonuses, less parking requirements, and that sort of thing. So the third and the fourth relate to evictions. So when this group of people in the state started, talking about the eviction crisis, one of the things that we talked about were the laws that were currently on the books. And so some changes have been made since then to include, written leases. Prior to that, it wasn't required to have a written lease in the state of Virginia. A recent law that was passed is capping late fees at 10%. But there could be other tenant protections against evictions, such as increasing the pay or quit time. Right now, if you don't pay your rent in 5 days, you will get a late fee, and they will start eviction proceedings after that. And so if we increase that, that might help with people paying their rent. Actually, let me correct that. We're in a kind of an emergency COVID situation now, and there was a law that was passed that's still on the books that gives the pay or quit 14 days and requires landlords to set up payment plans for tenants. But that's going to sunset in a year from now. So potentially we might want to look at other kinds of laws that might protect tenants. The last one is about mitigating the impact of evictions, which really looks at expungement of records. Right now, there's only, if you get an eviction on your record, it's there forever. It never gets expunged. The only law now that was on the books that was passed last year says if your eviction was dismissed, then you can ask for your record to be expunged. So it's not even an automatic one. So we probably have a ways to go with, making that, mitigating those impacts for people going forward. So that's really all I have. I know I went through things very quickly, but I was hoping that you would read the report and have some questions for me. So I'm happy to answer as many questions as we have. And I actually went under my time.
Alice, there are no questions in the chat yet. So if you do have questions, please put them in the chat.
Or you could, can they raise their hand, use
They
that
could, yep.
function?
And it could be that you have been so thorough in your duties. Oh, there we've got one. Would you like me to call on them and then have you respond?
Sure. That's,
or can you see it? Do you see them?
I can't see the, I can't see
okay.
the,
okay.
I can't see it.
All right. Sydney, you have a question?
It's actually a congratulations. I think this report was extremely well done, very thorough.
Thank you.
I just wanted to put that out as a praise. I think it's excellent.
Thank you.
Martha, you have a question?
Oh, thank you. I agree. It's an important study, so thank you very much. I wondered if you all gave thought to including home ownership in your study.
Well, so funny that you should ask that. So we are, we now have a housing issues committee at the state level that I chair. And one of the things we're working on is, and I meant to mention this to begin with, is racial disparities in housing. And one of the major racial disparities is in the home ownership level for Black and brown people versus white. And it's actually gone down in the last 10 years. And or increased. The disparity has increased because during the housing crisis in the 2008 and 9, so many subprime loans were given to Black and brown families. And so there were so many more foreclosures in that population. So yes, and something is actually in the works right now at the Poverty Law Center and the Black Caucus in terms of trying to do something about that. I don't know what that would be, but that's really the only area that we would be, I think, focusing on in terms of home ownership. And I don't know if you had some other thoughts in terms of that.
No, I mean, I've just been reading more about the home ownership, and just as you're talking about, and how it's just, you know, an important part of
Right.
acquiring wealth and passing on
Yes.
to future generations, and also, you know, the pride of ownership.
Right. Yeah. So hopefully you'll be hearing something about that as you know, the months go on.
Good, thank you.
Alice, the next question is, could you speak to next steps when the position is added to positioned for action?
Well, so as I said, the next steps are really going to be working on this disparities in housing. We know there, because of past years of housing discrimination, you know, it's really hurt, obviously, Black wealth and home ownership. And, you know, the eviction rate in Black areas is so much higher than in Black and brown areas as well than other areas. And so we're going to really focus on that. And I'm also hoping to potentially add a fair housing position, which, you know, there's one at the federal level. So we recently had a person from home, the policy person from Housing Opportunities Made Equal, talk about fair housing. So that's a very important area, and hopefully we can add something about that as well. But there's other things too. There's a whole arena of manufactured housing, and you know, is there anything we want to do about that? So we'll continue our work and hopefully maybe be updating the study, hopefully, if it passes on Sunday.
The next question is, I understand that tenants are not allowed to withhold rent from landlords for things that need to be fixed. Would allowing that to happen have any effect on evictions?
Okay, so that's a very interesting point you've made. So tenants can actually, right now, it's lawful in the state of Virginia to put, you can't withhold it, just withhold it, but you can put it in escrow to be used, but it has to be done through court to be used for fixing up your property. But there was kind of a study done showing that if we have in Virginia an implicit warranty of habitability, meaning that even though it's implicit, your apartment is supposed to be in good shape. You know, you're supposed to have hot water and, you know, plumbing working and heat and all of that. But there's a lot of states that have a warranty of habitability as an affirmative defense. And what that means is if a tenant withholds rent, but then gets the landlord tries to evict that tenant for non-payment, the tenant can go to court and say, if there was a warranty of habitability as an affirmative defense, you know, that landlord, I've been complaining about, you know, infestation forever, and that person hasn't done anything. And so that's a correct defense, and the person can't be evicted. So I think there is some research that says if you have the warranty of habitability as an affirmative defense and you have extended pay or quit, then that really might have an impact on the number of evictions.
Thank you. Has there been discussion of providing public defender, parentheses, legal counsel at eviction hearings?
Yeah, I mean, the Virginia Poverty Law Center and Legal Aid have been working on this problem for the past 3 years. And in addition to the really working on these changes in laws, they've also ramped up the amount of legal assistance that they're providing. And I don't have it, but if you look up, you know, Virginia Poverty Law Center or legal aid, you should be able to find there's a number, there's a toll-free number that you can call if you're having an issue, and they will direct you to help wherever in the state that you need it. And they are they're hiring more attorneys, and hopefully they're going to be able to help more people as time goes on.
Would a mandatory inclusionary zoning ordinance only impact future development? Any impact on currently developed properties?
It's just for future development, right? And, you know, I don't know if it's certainly not a panacea, mandatory inclusionary zoning. But, you know, why not just allow localities to do it? And that way it will be in their toolkit and they can pass an ordinance if they want, but it's really up to localities to do it. So much of zoning really is in the hands of local jurisdictions. So how they zone an area is really their deal, you know?
Are there any rent to own options? Also, are there incentives for developers to build more housing options?
So the rent to own, you know, I know that actually we had a presentation at our local league of the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust, and they're actually doing a rent to own pilot. And a land trust is such that the land trust owns the land underneath the housing, so it's keeps the housing affordable in perpetuity. And they're trying this new thing for people who can't quite, you know, get it yet together to buy the house, but it's kind of, it helps them out. So, but, you know, whether or not others are doing that rent to own, I don't know. And the other part of the question again was, remind me, what was the other part of the question?
The other part of the question was, are there incentives for developers to build more housing options?
The incentives are some of the resources we talked about. So the Housing Trust Fund is a big incentive. A state low-income housing tax credit program is also an incentive because, you know, they get a tax credit for equity. So it doesn't really cost them too much or anything, as the case might be. So those are really the only incentives that I know of in addition to the federal low-income housing tax credits.
Have surveys been done to find out where low-income service and restaurant workers actually live, since many of them can't afford the rent of even a one-bedroom apartment?
I'm sure there have been, I don't off the top of my head know any, but I'm sure there have been. I'm sure they're, you know, living with friends, you know, or, you know, I mean, I don't know any other way that they could do it unless they happen to be lucky enough to live in Arlington where they have rental subsidies. Use Arlington for everything that's, you know, because they pretty much are doing everything. If it's not Arlington, it's Fairfax. So
Thank you. Virginia, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I can't help but say that's a question for transportation. And that's getting people who had low incomes from their low income housing to the places where that higher entry level positions have. You see what I'm saying? I'm not saying it very well.
but you're right. There's, you know, housing is linked to pretty much everything. Okay. It's linked to health, education, transportation, jobs, everything. And and justice. You know, really there isn't any racial justice without housing justice. One of the, biggest reasons we're in the pickle we are with areas that are, very, predominantly very low income are because of the decisions that were made by the federal government and local and state government in the last, 75 years of where people could live and what they could borrow and not borrow. So anyway, but you all know that. I'm preaching to the choir.
There are currently no questions. Oh, here we
Whoops.
go. And I think it is just a comment, but Chris, did you want to?
Yeah, it's just a comment. In Arlington, we may have a good program, but I'm told that the housing fund restricts what the county board can do in terms of what it can demand from the builders. So they can't demand more affordable units or ask them to pay more into a fund. So even though we're providing those kinds of things, there's still a shortage.
Yes. Oh, yes, for sure. But you're prioritizing. I mean, my son and his family live in Arlington. And, there's an affordable housing building going up, right down the street from them. And you just don't see that around here. So, and you have some really amazing nonprofit developers in Northern Virginia.
Are there any other questions for Alice? Then thank you so much.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
You really have done that good of a job of
Oh, wait a
educating
minute.
us.
I don't know.
It's a thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for taking your time, and I guess you can now go and watch the debate.
Thank you. That was so much information.
All right, you're welcome.
And that
And
book,
so
Evicted,
clear.
is excellent.
Okay, great.
And so clear is your presentation.
Just
Thank
want
you.
to say something. I noticed there were some links in the chat room, and if you wanted to save the chat for the information provided, you can do that. There's a little file in the lower right corner, the 3 dots. You click on that, and it'll ask you if you want to save this chat.
Thank you, Diane. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Good job.
Good information in the chat we want to take with us.
Okay, great. Cheyenne is on our Richmond Affordable Housing Committee.
Okay.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for letting me. Alice is a wonderful leader.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
You all have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.